Let her wait. Those 3 words left Richard Whitmore's mouth with the ease of a man who had never been asked to prove he belonged anywhere. He didn't say them in anger. That was what made them worse. He said them while glancing at the security monitor mounted beside the glass wall of his 42nd floor office, his silver cuff links catching the pale morning light, his attention already drifting back to the emergency board packet spread across his desk. On the screen below, in the marble lobby of Whitmore and Vale Properties, a black woman stood at the reception desk 5 minutes before 9, holding a worn leather portfolio against her side. She wore a camel-colored coat, simple black heels, and no visible jewelry except a small gold cross at her throat. No entourage, no private counsel, no luxury handbag placed carefully for people to notice. Just a woman with calm shoulders, tired eyes, and the kind of stillness that made insecure people mistake patience for weakness. Claire Bennett, Richard's executive assistant, held the lobby phone to her ear and lowered her voice. She says her name is Naomi Carter, sir. She says she has a 9 o'clock appointment. Richard looked at the screen again, this time longer. Around him, the office hummed with controlled panic. Phones vibrated. Emails stacked up. A $500 million financing agreement sat unsigned in the conference room, and the Harbor District project, the largest development Whitmore and Vale had attempted in 20 years, was one bad morning away from collapsing into lawsuits, lender calls, and headlines no CEO wanted to see before lunch. Carter Meridian Holdings was supposed to arrive today. Their investment was supposed to save everything. Richard had imagined black SUVs at the curb, polished attorneys stepping out in pairs, a senior partner in a navy suit, maybe someone from New York with the clipped voice of old money, and the confidence of someone who had never waited in a lobby unless a camera was there to admire them. He had not imagined the woman on the monitor, standing alone beside a vase of white orchids while reception staff looked past her as if she were part of the furniture. That can't be. Our investor, Richard said, smoothing the front of his tailored charcoal suit. Carter Meridian wouldn't send someone like that without notice. Claire hesitated. Should I ask for identification? Richard gave a small, humorless laugh. No. Don't embarrass an actual client by treating every walk-in like royalty. Tell her I'm tied up. If she has paperwork, she can leave it. Claire swallowed. And if she insists on waiting? Richard had already turned back toward the window, where downtown Atlanta shimmered under a hard blue sky, all glass, steel, and heat rising off Peachtree Street. Then let her wait. Downstairs, Claire repeated the message in softer words. The kind businesses use when they want disrespect to sound professional. Naomi Carter listened without blinking. Behind her, the revolving door sighed open and closed, bringing in men who smelled faintly of expensive coffee and cold air from luxury cars. One arrived 20 minutes late and was escorted upstairs immediately. Another forgot his visitor badge and still received a warm smile. Naomi was directed to a low gray chair near a potted ficus, just far enough from the main seating area to make the separation feel accidental. She sat, placed her portfolio on her lap, and checked the slim watch on her wrist. 9 o'clock became 9:30. 9:30 became 10:15. No water came. No update came. The marble beneath her shoes held the chill of the building like a warning. And high above her, Richard Whitmore prepared to impress the most important client of his career, unaware that he had already made her wait. Naomi Carter had learned early that the world often asked black women to be grateful for rooms they had already earned the right to enter. Her mother, Evelyn Carter, used to clean office buildings after midnight in Birmingham, walking empty hallways with a vacuum cord trailing behind her like a thin black river. Sometimes, when child care fell through, Naomi sat in a corner of those buildings with a library book open on her knees, watching her mother polish conference tables where men would later make decisions about money they never had to beg for. Evelyn never complained in front of her daughter. She only worked, wiped her hands on a folded towel and said, "Baby, the way people treat you when they think you have nothing tells you who they really are." Naomi carried that sentence into every boardroom she entered. She carried it through college on scholarships and cafeteria shifts, through her first job where clients asked whose assistant she was, through the venture meetings where men repeated her ideas louder and got thanked for them. By 38, she had built Carter Meridian Holdings into one of the most disciplined private investment firms in the Southeast, quiet by design, powerful by results. She did not chase magazine covers. She did not host charity galas just to see her name printed beside people who smiled with their teeth and not their eyes. She preferred clean numbers, strong communities, and contracts that created something more lasting than applause. That was why Harbor District had interested her. On paper, it was a waterfront redevelopment project with hotels, housing, retail space, and a new medical office complex. But underneath the projections, Naomi saw something else. 1,500 construction jobs, affordable units that could keep working families near the city, and a chance to make sure a neighborhood was not simply polished until everyone who built it could no longer afford to live there. She had flown into Atlanta the night before, taken a modest hotel room 10 minutes from the office, and reviewed the final financing terms until nearly 2 in the morning. She came alone because she wanted to see Whitmore in Vail without theater. No black car service. No senior counsel walking 3 steps ahead. No introduction designed to bend the room before she spoke. Money could make people perform respect. Naomi wanted to know what remained when they did not know money was watching. At 10:40, a young receptionist passed with a tray of iced coffees balanced in both hands. She offered one to a man scrolling through his phone near the elevator, then moved right past Naomi without slowing down. Naomi looked at her small notebook and made one neat mark beside the time. At 11:10, a white broker in a blue suit stopped near her chair and gave her portfolio a quick glance. "Courier pickup is usually through the service entrance," he said, not unkindly, which somehow made it sharper. Naomi looked up at him. Her voice stayed warm. "I am not a courier." The man blinked, embarrassed for half a second, then laughed as if she had misunderstood the joke he had never made. "My mistake." He walked away before she could answer. Naomi wrote nothing that time. She only watched his reflection blur across the polished marble floor. The lobby smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, orchids, and expensive cologne. Sunlight kept shifting through the high windows, moving slowly across the wall behind reception like a clock no one wanted to read. Her phone buzzed twice. One message from her chief financial officer asked if the signing had begun. Another from her legal counsel said the banks were expecting confirmation before close of business. Naomi typed back, "Not yet." Still observing. Then she placed the phone face down. A few yards away, near the security desk, a tall black man in a navy uniform had been watching the pattern longer than anyone else. His name badge read Marcus Reed. He said nothing at first. He simply noticed the untouched water cooler beside reception, the visitors who were greeted by name, the woman in the gray chair who had been asked to wait until waiting became the message. At 11:28, Marcus walked over with a small paper cup of water. He did not make it dramatic. He did not lower his voice into pity. He just offered it with both respect and ordinary kindness. "Ma'am, I thought you might need this." Naomi looked at the cup, then at him. For the first time that morning, something in her face softened. "Thank you, Mr. Reed." Marcus seemed surprised she had read his name. "You are welcome, Miss Carter." She took the cup carefully, feeling the cool water press through the paper into her palm. It was such a small thing. Almost nothing. And yet, after more than 2 hours inside a building desperate for her money, it was the first thing that felt human. By 11:45, the 42nd floor no longer looked like a place where powerful people made decisions. It looked like a place where powerful people were trying not to look afraid. Richard Whitmore stood at the head of the main conference room, one hand braced on the back of a leather chair, the other holding a phone that had not stopped vibrating for nearly an hour. Beyond the glass wall, Atlanta burned under a bright noon sun, but inside the room the air felt refrigerated, thin, and strained. The Harbor District presentation glowed on the wall screen in polished blue and silver slides, each one promising growth, stability, luxury, and vision. None of the slides mentioned the truth. The truth was in the red numbers buried inside the binders. The truth was in the lender emails waiting in Richard's inbox. The truth was in the faces of his senior team, who had spent the morning pretending that a company could survive on confidence when what it needed was cash. "The bank wants confirmation before 3 o'clock, said Daniel Price, the chief financial officer, his voice low enough to sound private even though everyone heard it. He was a thin white man with rimless glasses and a habit of rubbing his wedding ring whenever numbers went bad. "If Carter Meridian does not sign today, they can freeze the construction draw. Once that happens, the subcontractors start filing notices, the press gets curious, And the board will not wait until Monday. Richard kept his eyes on the screen. They will sign. They are not here. They are late. Daniel did not answer right away. A junior attorney near the window looked down at her notes. Claire Bennett stood just inside the door with her tablet against her chest, pale and silent. Richard turned toward her. Have you heard from the Carter Meridian delegation? Claire's fingers tightened around the tablet. Only the woman downstairs, sir. Naomi Carter. She has now been waiting almost 3 hours. The name moved through the room without landing. No one knew what to do with it yet. Richard exhaled through his nose. I told you. That is not the delegation. Daniel looked up. Did we confirm that? Richard's jaw shifted. He disliked questions that sounded like doubt, especially in front of people who needed him to look certain. Daniel firms, managing $500 million in deployable capital, do not send one woman with a used portfolio and no legal team. The room went still in the way rooms go still when prejudice has been dressed up as business judgment. Claire lowered her eyes. The junior attorney stopped writing. On the screen, a rendering of Harbor District showed families walking beside clean water and new storefronts. A future so bright it almost hurt to look at. Richard tapped the table once. Call reception. Bring her up, give her 10 minutes and find out what she wants. If she is selling something, send her to procurement. If she is confused, send her to the right building. We have real work to do. Claire nodded, but she did not move immediately. Sir, what if she really is connected to Carter Meridian? Richard turned to her slowly. He did not raise his voice. He did not have to. Then she should have introduced herself properly. Downstairs, Naomi was standing near the security desk, returning the empty paper cup to Marcus Reed. She had remained seated until her knees began to ache from the low chair, then stood because dignity sometimes needed the body to cooperate. Marcus gave her a quiet nod, the kind people give when they see more than they are allowed to say. Long morning, he said. Naomi smiled faintly. Long enough to learn a lot. The phone at reception rang. The receptionist answered, listened, and suddenly straightened as if someone had pulled a string through her spine. Her eyes flicked to Naomi, then away, then back again with a new caution. Miss Carter, she called, her voice brighter than it had been all morning. Mr. Whitmore can see you now. Naomi looked at the elevator bank, where the private doors gleamed in brushed steel. Then she looked once more at Marcus. Thank you for the water. You should not have had to thank anyone for that, he said quietly. Naomi held his gaze for a moment, and the softness in her expression did not erase the steel beneath it. That is exactly the point. She picked up her worn leather portfolio and walked toward the elevator. Behind the reception desk, the same people who had ignored her now watched every step. The doors opened with a clean metallic whisper. Naomi entered alone. As the elevator rose toward the 42nd floor, the lobby fell away beneath her, but the morning came with her. The chair, the silence, the missed greetings, the paper cup, the assumption that she was nobody until proven otherwise. She did not smooth her coat. She did not rehearse her anger. She simply held the portfolio close and watched the numbers climb. The elevator doors opened onto the 42nd floor with a soft chime that sounded too polite for the morning Naomi Carter had just endured. Claire Bennett was waiting there, posture straight, tablet pressed against her ribs like a shield. Up close, Naomi could see the faint tension around her eyes, the kind that came from following orders she did not fully respect but had not been brave enough to question. Miss Carter, Claire said, and this time the name carried weight. Mr. Whitmore will see you in the main conference room. Naomi stepped out onto dark hardwood floors polished so perfectly they reflected the ceiling lights in long white lines. The hallway smelled of leather, coffee, and chilled air. Framed photographs of completed towers lined the wall, each one showing Richard Whitmore shaking hands with mayors, governors, and men who looked comfortable beside oversized checks. Naomi walked past them without slowing down. Claire kept half a step ahead, then glanced back. I apologize for the delay. Naomi looked at her, not harshly, not warmly either. Did Mr. Whitmore ask you to say that? Claire's mouth opened, then closed. The silence answered first. No, she admitted. Then keep it for yourself, Naomi said quietly. You may need it later. Claire swallowed and pushed open the conference room door. Every face turned at once. Daniel Price stood near the screen with the financial model still glowing behind him. 2 attorneys sat with open binders. 3 senior executives occupied the far side of the table, their expressions carefully neutral, though their eyes moved over Naomi's coat, her portfolio, her shoes, measuring and mismeasuring in the same breath. Richard Whitmore remained at the head of the table. He did not come forward. He did not offer his hand. He looked at Naomi as if her presence were an interruption that had somehow found a name. "Miss Carter," he said, using the title with the thin patience of a man granting 5 minutes to someone beneath his schedule. "I understand you have been waiting downstairs." Naomi placed her portfolio on the table but did not sit. "Yes." Richard gave a small nod, as though that settled the matter. "We are in the middle of a critical financing discussion, so I hope you will be brief. If this is regarding vendor services, community outreach, or some kind of local partnership request, my team can redirect you to the appropriate department." The words landed softly, but the meaning did not. A junior attorney lowered her eyes. Daniel Price stopped moving his pen. Claire remained by the door, frozen between loyalty and shame. Naomi looked at Richard for a full second, then another. She could have opened the portfolio. She could have placed the signed commitment letter in the center of the table and watched the room rearrange itself around the truth. Instead, she let the silence stretch just long enough for everyone to hear the assumption inside his sentence. "I am not here for vendor services," she said. Richard's smile tightened. "Then help me understand why you are here." Naomi drew one document from the portfolio, clean, thick, and marked with tabs in navy blue. "I came to discuss the Harbor District capital structure." One of the executives gave a faint cough, almost a laugh that had lost its courage halfway out. Richard glanced at the document but did not take it. "That structure is being handled at a level that may be difficult to follow without the proper background." Naomi's fingers rested lightly on the edge of the paper. Her nails were short, unpainted, steady. "Then it is fortunate that I have the proper background." Richard leaned back. "Miss Carter, we are expecting the actual Carter Meridian delegation. This table is for serious capital." The room went cold. Not the kind of cold made by air conditioning. The other kind. The kind that enters through a sentence and settles into people's bones. Naomi did not flinch. Somewhere far below, traffic moved along Peachtree Street, tiny and soundless through the sealed glass. She looked at the empty chair near the head of the table, the chair that had been waiting for someone Richard had imagined but not recognized. Then she slid the document toward him, slow and precise. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, her voice calm enough to make the room lean in, "if you need serious capital, you should start by learning how to recognize serious people." Richard's eyes sharpened, but Naomi continued before he could answer. "I have sat in your lobby for almost 3 hours. I watched men arrive late and get treated with more respect than I received while arriving early. I was mistaken for a courier. I was offered no update, no water, no courtesy, except from your security officer downstairs." Her gaze moved across the table, touching every person without begging any of them to rescue her. "So before we discuss $500 million, I have one question." Richard's jaw tightened. "And what is that?" Naomi placed both hands flat on the table. Not hard, not dramatic, simply grounded. "Is this how Whitmore and Vale treats people when it does not know how much they are worth?" For a moment, no one in the conference room moved. Naomi Carter's question remained on the table, heavier than the binders, heavier than the projected numbers, heavier than Richard Whitmore's reputation. Daniel Price looked down at the document she had slid forward, but he did not touch it. Claire Bennett stood by the door with her tablet lowered now, her face pale in the reflected light. Richard stared at Naomi as if she had violated a rule he had never needed to explain because most people obeyed it without being told. People like her were supposed to be patient, grateful, careful with their tone. They were not supposed to turn a corporate insult into a mirror. Richard gave a short laugh, but it came out dry. "Miss Carter, I appreciate passion, but I do not appreciate theatrics." Naomi's expression did not change. "Respect is not theater." One of the senior executives shifted in his chair. The leather made a faint sound, small but sharp in the silence. Richard placed both hands on the table and leaned forward just enough to remind the room whose name was on the building. "Let me be clear. This company is managing a complex transaction involving banks, public agencies, private capital, and thousands of jobs. I do not have time for emotional accusations from someone who walked in without proper representation and expected immediate access." Naomi looked at him steadily. The old heat rose in her chest, familiar but controlled. She thought of her mother standing in empty offices after midnight, invisible until something went missing. She thought of every lobby where she had been asked to prove an appointment already printed on the calendar. She thought of Marcus Reed downstairs, offering a paper cup of water with more professionalism than anyone wearing a tailored suit upstairs had shown all morning. "I arrived 5 minutes early," she said. "Your team confirmed my name. Your assistant called this floor. You looked at me on a camera and made a decision before hearing one word from me." Richard's eyes flicked toward Claire. Claire did not defend him. That silence irritated him more than any accusation could have. "Careful," he said quietly. Naomi heard the warning, but she also heard the fear beneath it. "No, Mr. Whitmore," she replied. "Careful is what I have been for 3 hours. Careful is sitting in your lobby while people decide I do not belong. Careful is watching a company ask for trust, while failing the smallest test of dignity." Daniel finally reached for the document. Richard turned sharply. "Leave it." Daniel froze with his fingers inches from the page. Naomi noticed. Everyone noticed. Richard straightened his jacket, reclaiming the posture of command. "We are done here. If you have a proposal, send it through proper channels. If you have a complaint, human resources can document it. But this room is reserved for people prepared to discuss real capital, not personal grievances." The word struck the air with polished cruelty. Not loud, not vulgar. Worse than that. Professional enough to be denied later. Naomi inhaled once through her nose. The city beyond the windows blurred in the brightness, glass towers trembling in the heat. She reached for the document but did not pick it up yet. "That is your final answer?" Richard smiled without warmth. "It is the only answer this meeting deserves." Claire's mouth tightened. The junior attorney stared at the tabletop as if shame had become something physical she could read in the grain. Daniel's face had gone still, calculation moving behind his glasses. Naomi closed the portfolio with a soft snap. It sounded louder than it should have. "Then I will not take more of your time." Richard gave a small nod, already turning toward the screen, already deciding the problem had been removed. But Naomi did not step away. Instead, she reached into the inner pocket of the portfolio and removed a single cream-colored business card. She placed it at the center of the table, directly beside the untouched financing document. No flourish, no raised voice. Just the quiet precision of a woman who understood that truth did not need decoration. "Before I leave," she said, "you may want to read that." Richard did not move at first. His pride held him in place. Then Daniel Price leaned slightly forward, just enough to see the lettering. His breath changed. Claire saw it happen. The room saw it happen. Richard, annoyed by the shift, glanced down at the card. The name was printed in dark blue ink, simple and unmistakable. Naomi Elise Carter, founder and managing partner, Carter Meridian Holdings. For the first time all morning, Richard Whitmore had nothing ready to say. The business card sat between Naomi Carter and Richard Whitmore like a small, quiet verdict. No one touched it. No one needed to. The letters were clear enough from where Daniel Price stood frozen beside the screen, and the silence that followed did what shouting never could. It stripped the room bare. The hum of the air conditioning seemed suddenly too loud. Somewhere in the wall, a vent clicked softly then settled. Outside the glass, traffic moved along Peachtree Street in bright ribbons of noon heat, but inside the conference room, time had narrowed to the cream-colored card on the polished table, and the man who had refused to see the woman who placed it there. Richard stared at the name. Naomi Elise Carter, founder and managing partner, Carter Meridian Holdings. His mouth opened slightly then closed. The confidence he had worn all morning did not fall away at once. It loosened in pieces. First the eyes, then the jaw, then the shoulders inside the expensive charcoal suit. Daniel reached for his laptop with careful hands, as if moving too quickly might break what was left of the room. He typed Naomi's name into the secure investor portal. The confirmation appeared almost instantly. His face lost color. Richard, he said, barely above a whisper. She is the authorized signatory. The junior attorney lifted her head. Claire Bennett pressed one hand against the doorframe. Richard did not look at any of them. He kept staring at the card, as though if he waited long enough, the title might rearrange itself into something less devastating. Naomi stood across from him, calm and still, her worn leather portfolio closed beneath her hand. She did not smile. There was no victory in her face, only a steadiness that made the room feel smaller. Richard finally reached for the financing document she had slid toward him earlier. His fingers brushed the navy tabs. Daniel spoke again, faster now, professional panic breaking through his restraint. Carter Meridian's commitment letter is attached to this packet. $500 million in staged capital, first tranche available upon signature. This is the agreement the bank has been waiting on. The words entered the room like cold water. $500 million. First tranche. Upon signature. Richard looked from the document to Naomi, and then to Claire, as if searching for someone else to blame. Claire did not offer him a place to hide. Her eyes were wet, not with tears exactly, but with the shame of recognizing a moment too late. Naomi drew in one slow breath. She could feel the paper cup Marcus had given her downstairs as if it were still in her palm. She could feel the low gray chair beneath her, the cold marble under her feet, the receptionist looking past her, the broker assuming she belonged at the service entrance. All of it was here now, invisible but present, standing beside her like witnesses. Richard cleared his throat. Miss Carter, there has been a misunderstanding. Naomi looked at him. The word hung between them, thin and insufficient. Misunderstanding. It was the kind of word people used when they wanted harm to sound accidental and bias to sound like confusion. No, she said softly. There has been an understanding. Just not the one you wanted revealed. Daniel lowered his eyes. The junior attorney's pen rolled slowly across the table and stopped against a binder. Nobody reached for it. Richard's hand rested near the business card, but he still did not pick it up. Naomi did. She lifted it gently, as if even now she refused to let his carelessness define the worth of her name. Then she placed it back into her portfolio. I came here prepared to sign, she said. The sentence barely rose above the room's silence, but every person heard it clearly. Richard's face tightened. And now? Naomi looked toward the window. Sunlight washed over the table, turning the glossy surface pale and hard like ice. For a few seconds she said nothing. That quiet was not hesitation. It was mercy deciding how much of itself to spend. Then she turned back to him. Now I am prepared to walk. For the first time that day, Richard Whitmore understood that silence could be more dangerous than anger. Naomi Carter had not threatened him. She had not raised her voice. She had simply said she was prepared to walk, and every number in the room seemed to collapse around those words. Daniel Price moved first because numbers had no patience for pride. He turned his laptop toward Richard, the secure banking dashboard still open. Red flags lined across the screen like warning lights on a runway. The lender deadline is 3 o'clock, Daniel said, his voice careful but urgent. Without Carter Meridian's signature, First Atlantic can freeze the construction draw by close of business. If that happens, Harbor District misses payroll for subcontractors next week. The board will call an emergency session tonight. Richard's eyes sharpened. Daniel. Daniel did not stop. Something in him had crossed a line too, not into rebellion but into truth. And if the board sees that we lost the only committed capital partner because of conduct in this office, they will ask who created that risk. The room tightened. Richard looked toward the screen again. Harbor District's beautiful rendering still glowed there. Families walking beneath young trees, storefronts bright with impossible sunlight, children near a fountain that had not yet been built. It looked almost cruel now, a future held hostage by one man's arrogance. Naomi followed his gaze, and for a moment her anger cooled into something heavier. She had not come to ruin a project. She had come because the proposal had promised affordable housing set aside for working families, a community clinic, and local hiring requirements strong enough to matter. She had come because development did not have to mean erasure. She had come because $500 million placed correctly could build more than profit, could build proof. But money placed in careless hands could also become a weapon against the very people it claimed to help. Richard turned back to her. His voice lowered, losing some of its polish. "Miss Carter, I recognize this morning was handled poorly." Naomi held his gaze. Handled poorly is when a meeting room is double booked. This was different. Claire's breath caught softly near the door. Richard looked at her, then at the junior attorney, then at Daniel, and finally back at Naomi. He seemed to understand that the witnesses were not going away. "What would you have me do?" he asked. It was not quite humility yet. It was need wearing the first unfamiliar shape of surrender. Naomi opened her portfolio again, but this time she did not remove the financing agreement. She removed a thinner document, one Richard had not noticed before, bound with a black clip. Before any capital moves, Carter Meridian performs a culture and governance review on every major partner. It is usually routine. Today made it simple. Daniel leaned forward. "What is that?" "An amendment," Naomi said. "Additional conditions for closing." Richard's face stiffened. "You had those prepared?" "I had standards prepared." She slid the document across the table. This time Daniel took it before Richard could stop him. He scanned the first page, and his expression changed from alarm to surprise. Client reception reform, anti-discrimination training, independent reporting channel, vendor equity audit, community oversight seat for Harbor District. Naomi nodded. And a written apology to every staff member who was instructed, directly or indirectly, to treat courtesy as something reserved for people who looked profitable. Richard's mouth tightened. "That is excessive." Naomi closed the portfolio slowly. The sound was soft, final enough to make him look up. "No, Mr. Whitmore. Excessive is asking a community to trust you with its future, when your own lobby cannot offer equal respect for 3 hours. The room went still again, but this silence was different. It was not shock. It was recognition moving from face to face, quiet and uncomfortable. Daniel set the amendment in front of Richard. Claire finally stepped away from the door and came closer to the table. Her voice was small but clear. "She is right." Richard stared at his assistant as if seeing her for the first time that day. Claire's hands trembled around the tablet, yet she did not retreat. "I heard the instruction. I softened it when I repeated it, but I still carried it out. That was wrong." Naomi looked at Claire, and the hardness in her eyes eased by the smallest measure. Richard looked around the room, searching for the old order, the easy obedience, the familiar protection of title and fear. But the room had shifted. The truth had taken a seat at the table, and it was not leaving. Richard Whitmore looked at the amendment as if it had been written in a language he had spent his whole career avoiding. Not because the words were complicated. They were painfully simple. Courtesy, access, accountability, equity, reporting, review. Each line asked for something his company should have already been willing to give without being forced by a $500 million signature. Daniel Price stood beside him, saying nothing now. Claire Bennett remained near the table, her admission still trembling in the air. Naomi Carter waited across from them, not impatient, not softened, simply present in the way a closed door is. Present when someone finally realizes they are on the wrong side of it. Richard picked up the document. The paper made a faint whisper between his fingers. "If I agree to these terms," he said slowly, "will Carter Meridian move forward?" Naomi did not answer right away. She looked through the glass wall toward the city, toward blocks of buildings where cleaners, drivers, nurses, cooks, security guards, teachers and construction crews kept Atlanta breathing while other people signed their names to its skyline. "That depends on whether you are agreeing because you need the money," she said, "or because you understand the failure." Richard's eyes lowered. For a second, the room saw not the polished chief executive officer, not the man framed in business magazines and charity photographs, but someone cornered by the truth of his own smallness. "I judged you before you spoke," he said. The words came out stiff, almost unwilling, but they came. Naomi remained still. "Yes." He glanced at Claire, then at Daniel, then at the junior attorney whose pen still lay untouched beside a binder. "I allowed my assumptions to become instructions. I let this office treat you as if your dignity needed financial proof." His voice thinned on the final words. The conference room no longer felt refrigerated. It felt exposed. Naomi's face did not change, but something behind her eyes shifted. Not forgiveness, not yet, but recognition that truth had finally entered the room wearing no decoration. Richard pushed his chair back and stood fully. "Miss Carter, I apologize." Naomi held his gaze. "Not only to me." Richard understood before she said more. His throat moved once. "Bring up the security officer from the lobby," he said to Claire. "And the receptionist. Now." Claire nodded quickly and stepped out. No one spoke while they waited. The screen on the wall dimmed from inactivity, and the bright rendering of Harbor District faded into a dark reflection of everyone in the room. Richard could see himself there, smaller than he liked, standing beside the table where his pride had almost cost thousands of jobs and exposed exactly what kind of culture he had built. A few minutes later, Claire returned with Marcus Reed and the receptionist, whose face had gone tight with worry. Marcus entered carefully, hat in hand, eyes moving first to Naomi. She gave him a small nod, and he seemed to breathe a little easier. Richard turned toward him, then toward the receptionist. "This morning Miss Carter was treated without the respect this company owes every person who walks through our doors," he said. "That happened because of a decision I made and a culture I allowed. You both deserve to hear me say that plainly." The receptionist swallowed hard. Marcus stood straighter, his expression unreadable. Richard looked at Naomi again, then back to them. "I am sorry." The words were not elegant. They did not erase anything. But they landed in the room without disguise. Naomi opened the amendment and turned it toward him. "There is one more condition." Richard braced himself. "Mr. Reed was the only person in this building who treated me like I belonged before he knew my name mattered. I want him included in the new client experience leadership team, with authority, salary adjustment, and a direct reporting line for reception culture." Marcus blinked. "Miss Carter, I was just doing my job." Naomi looked at him with quiet warmth. "No, Mr. Reed. You were doing the job this building forgot it had." Richard stared at Marcus, then at the paper, then nodded. "Done." Daniel picked up a pen and began marking the amendment for immediate execution. Claire wiped quickly beneath one eye and pretended she had not. Naomi finally sat down, not because Richard had invited her, but because the terms of the room had changed. She opened the financing agreement to the signature page. "Kindness is not weakness, Mr. Whitmore," she said softly. "But disrespect is expensive." Richard lowered his eyes. This time he listened. The signing happened without applause. Naomi Carter wrote her name in steady blue ink, then passed the document to Richard Whitmore, who signed beneath the amended terms with a hand that moved slower than it had that morning. Daniel Price countersigned the closing certification. The junior attorney scanned the pages. Claire Bennett sent the confirmation to First Atlantic before the 3 o'clock deadline, and when the lender's approval came back, no one cheered. The relief was too heavy for celebration. It settled over the conference room like rain after a long drought, quiet, necessary, and humbling. Naomi closed her portfolio and stood. Richard stood too, but this time he did not make the room wait for his authority to arrive first. "Miss Carter," he said, "thank you for giving us the chance to correct this." Naomi looked at him for a moment. "Do not thank me for the chance. Honor it." He nodded, and for once the gesture did not look practiced. Downstairs, the lobby had changed before the furniture did. The same marble floor held the same cold shine. The same orchid stood in the same white vase. The same gray chair sat near the potted ficus, empty now, ordinary to anyone who had not watched what happened there. But people noticed Naomi as she stepped out of the private elevator. Not because Claire walked beside her. Not because Richard followed 2 steps behind. Not because Daniel carried the sign packet like something fragile. They noticed her because the building had learned in one afternoon how expensive blindness could be. Marcus Reed stood near the security desk, still holding his hat, still looking like a man trying to understand how kindness had become a promotion. Naomi walked to him and offered her hand. "Director Reed," she said. Marcus shook his head softly, almost smiling. "That is going to take some getting used to. Good things sometimes do." The receptionist stood behind the desk with her hands folded, eyes damp and nervous. Naomi turned to her, not with cruelty, not with triumph, but with a calm that asked for better without needing to punish. "Everyone starts somewhere," Naomi said. "Start again." The receptionist nodded, unable to speak. 1 week later, a new nameplate was mounted beside the lobby entrance, brushed steel catching the morning light. Marcus Reed, Director of Client Experience and Security Culture. Beneath it, a smaller plaque listed the company's new reception standard, simple enough for anyone to understand. Every guest is greeted before they are evaluated. Naomi returned that morning for the formal project launch. She wore the same camel-colored coat. The same small gold cross rested at her throat. No entourage entered ahead of her. No performance announced her value. Richard came down himself, not with cameras, not with a public relations team, but alone. He met her at the entrance and held the door open. "Good morning, Miss Carter," he said. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore." For a second, neither moved. Sunlight poured through the high glass and spread across the lobby floor, touching the gray chair where she had once waited, the security desk where Marcus had offered water, the elevator doors that had carried the truth upstairs. The paper cup was gone. The old silence was gone too. In its place was something quieter and stronger than apology. A beginning measured not by words but by behavior. Naomi walked past the chair without slowing, and no one rushed to prove they recognized her now. They simply made room. Marcus nodded from his desk. Claire greeted a delivery driver by name. The receptionist offered water to an elderly man before asking what appointment he had. Richard watched it all with his hands at his sides, understanding at last that respect was not a luxury service for important people. It was the floor every decent room was built on. Naomi stepped into the elevator. The doors began to close, reflecting her face in a narrow strip of steel. Calm, tired, unbroken. Just before the gap disappeared, she looked once toward the lobby, where morning light rested on marble like a promise kept softly. No one said anything. And that was enough.